There was a time when betrayal was discovered in private, when families had the dignity of processing infidelity behind closed doors, and when public shame was not used as a weapon of revenge. But what happened on Family Feud in March 2025 would demonstrate that sometimes the person exposing a secret has their own hidden agenda, and that public humiliation reveals more about the accuser's character than the accused's failures. When Sarah Mitchell stepped onto that stage with her husband James, she believed she was about to deliver justice by exposing his affair in front of millions. What she did not anticipate was that Steve Harvey would refuse to participate in her orchestrated revenge, that he would question her motives for choosing such a brutal and public method of confrontation, and that her moment of triumph would instead reveal the complex and often ugly reality of how couples weaponize infidelity against each other. This is a story about betrayal, about revenge, and about why the method we choose to address wrongdoing reveals as much about our character as the original transgression itself. Before we begin this complicated story about infidelity, public shame, and the choices we make when we have been deeply hurt, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. These stories remind us that even when we have been wronged, how we respond to that wrong defines who we are and determines whether healing is possible or whether we simply perpetuate cycles of harm and destruction. James Mitchell was 42 years old, a successful commercial real estate broker from Houston, Texas, who had spent 19 years building what he believed was a solid marriage with his wife Sarah. He was known in his professional community as charismatic, hardworking, and skilled at closing difficult deals. His clients appreciated his attention to detail and his ability to navigate complex negotiations. His colleagues recognized him as someone who could be counted on to deliver results even under pressure. To most people who knew him professionally, James represented success and competence in his field. Sarah Mitchell, at 40 years old, had spent the majority of their marriage as a stay-at-home mother raising their 3 children, now teenagers ranging from 13 to 17. She had been a dedicated parent, managing household responsibilities while supporting James's demanding career that required frequent travel and long hours. For most of their marriage, Sarah had defined herself primarily through her roles as wife and mother, having left her own career in event planning when their first child was born at James's suggestion that one parent should be home full-time with the children. The foundation of their marriage had always been somewhat unequal, though Sarah had not fully recognized the imbalance until recent events had forced her to confront the reality of their relationship dynamics. James had established early on that his career took priority because it generated the family's income. Major decisions about where they lived, how money was spent, and how their time was allocated were made primarily with James's preferences and professional needs as the primary consideration. Sarah had adapted to this dynamic, convinced that supporting her husband's success was the same as building their family's future together. 8 months before their Family Feud appearance, Sarah had discovered evidence of James's infidelity in the form of credit card statements showing hotel charges and restaurant expenses during business trips that seemed excessive for solo travel. When she had confronted James with her suspicions, he had initially denied any wrongdoing, suggesting she was being paranoid and reading too much into normal business expenses. However, as Sarah had continued investigating, finding text messages and emails that James had failed to delete completely from his devices, the evidence of an ongoing affair became undeniable. The affair had been with a colleague named Monica, a younger commercial real estate agent who worked for a competing firm. James and Monica had been involved for approximately 14 months, conducting their relationship during business trips and after-hours meetings that James had presented to Sarah as work obligations. The relationship had involved not just physical betrayal but emotional intimacy that James had withheld from his marriage, with text exchanges revealing that James had complained to Monica about feeling unappreciated at home and had characterized his marriage to Sarah as obligatory rather than fulfilling. When confronted with irrefutable evidence, James had finally admitted to the affair. His admission had been followed by what Sarah experienced as inadequate remorse and insufficient effort to repair the damage he had caused. James had characterized the affair as a mistake driven by stress and opportunity, rather than acknowledging deeper issues in their marriage or taking genuine responsibility for his choices. He had agreed to end the relationship with Monica and had said he wanted to work on their marriage, but his follow-through had been minimal. He had declined Sarah's requests to attend couples counseling, suggesting it was unnecessary and that they could work things out on their own. He had been unwilling to provide full transparency about his communications or whereabouts, claiming that Sarah needed to trust him rather than constantly monitoring him as if he were a child. Sarah had been devastated by the betrayal, not only because of the infidelity itself, but because of what the affair revealed about how James viewed their marriage and her contributions to their family. In his communications with Monica, James had minimized Sarah's role in their family's success, ignoring the years she had spent managing their household and raising their children so that he could focus on building his career without domestic distractions. He had portrayed Sarah as demanding and unsupportive when in reality she had accommodated virtually all his needs and preferences for nearly 2 decades. The disrespect evident in how James spoke about her to his affair partner had been in some ways more painful than the physical betrayal itself. In the months following discovery of the affair, Sarah had gone through complex emotional stages. Initial devastation and grief had given way to anger and a desire for James to fully understand the pain he had caused. When it became clear that James was not going to do the deep work necessary to repair their marriage, when his apologies remained surface level and his changes minimal, Sarah's anger had evolved into a desire for revenge, or at minimum for James to experience consequences proportional to the harm he had inflicted. She had wanted him to feel exposed, humiliated, and forced to face public judgment for his behavior, just as she had felt humiliated upon discovering his betrayal. When the opportunity to appear on Family Feud had presented itself through a colleague of Sarah's brother, Sarah had recognized it as a platform for delivering the public exposure and humiliation she believed James deserved. She had agreed to the appearance despite James's reluctance, using emotional manipulation and threats about their marriage to pressure him into participating. James had ultimately agreed, hoping that going along with Sarah's request might demonstrate his commitment to working on their marriage and might satisfy whatever need she had to have this experience. What James did not know was that Sarah had been planning for weeks how to use the national television platform to expose his infidelity, to announce his betrayal to millions of viewers, and to ensure that his professional reputation and public image suffered consequences for his private moral failures. She had rehearsed what she would say, how she would deliver the information for maximum impact, and how she would frame his betrayal in ways that would make him look as terrible as possible. She believed that public shame was justice, that humiliating James on national television was appropriate payback for the humiliation she had experienced upon discovering his affair. What Sarah did not anticipate was that Steve Harvey would not view her planned public exposure as justified revenge, but rather as a choice that revealed troubling aspects of her own character and judgment. She had not considered that weaponizing a national platform to shame her husband might be viewed as cruel and destructive regardless of his infidelity, and she had not prepared for the possibility that her moment of exposing James's betrayal would become a moment where her own choices and motivations would be questioned and critiqued, rather than simply accepted as the righteous response of a wronged wife. The taping took place on a bright Tuesday morning in Los Angeles. The Mitchell family arrived together, though the atmosphere between Sarah and James was visibly tense. James appeared uncomfortable and anxious, clearly not wanting to be there but going through with the appearance to avoid further conflict with Sarah. Sarah was focused and determined, her energy suggesting she was preparing for something beyond a typical game show experience. Their family team consisted of James and Sarah, Sarah's brother Michael, James's sister Patricia, and Sarah's college friend Rebecca, who had agreed to participate despite being aware of the marital crisis and feeling uncomfortable about being part of whatever Sarah had planned. Steve Harvey greeted both families with his characteristic warmth and energy, working his way down the line to meet each contestant and learn their stories. When he reached James, He asked about his career in commercial real estate and how long he had been married to Sarah. James spoke briefly about his work and mentioned they had been married for 19 years. His responses were short and guarded, his body language suggesting significant discomfort with the situation. Steve's experienced eye caught the tension, but continued with standard introductions, not yet aware of the dynamics about to unfold. When Steve reached Sarah, he asked her about her life and what she appreciated about being married to James for nearly 2 decades. Sarah's response was immediate and loaded with barely concealed anger. She said with a tight smile that what she appreciated most was that 19 years had given her plenty of time to learn exactly who James really was, and that she was grateful for the opportunity to share that knowledge with others. The comment was delivered in a way that suggested humor on the surface, but carried unmistakable hostility beneath. Steve's expression shifted slightly, registering that something was not quite right in this couple's dynamic, and that Sarah's comment had been more threatening than affectionate. The game began with standard energy and competition. The first few rounds progressed with typical game show dynamics, both families answering questions and accumulating points. However, tension was building that became increasingly evident with each interaction between James and Sarah. When James provided a correct answer that earned significant points, Sarah's congratulations were delivered with sarcasm rather than genuine celebration. When Sarah answered a question, James remained silent rather than offering the enthusiastic support typical of most family teams. The situation escalated dramatically during the 4th round when the question asked contestants to name something people hide from their spouses. It was Sarah's turn to answer, and she approached the podium with an expression of barely contained satisfaction, as if this moment was exactly what she had been waiting for. She buzzed in, and instead of providing a simple 1- or 2-word answer typical for the game, she launched into a detailed statement clearly designed not to answer the game question, but to expose James's infidelity. Sarah spoke directly into the microphone, her voice clear and deliberate. She announced that some people hide affairs from their spouses, and that she knew this from personal experience, because her husband James had been carrying on a 14-month affair with a woman named Monica from his office, while telling Sarah he was working late or traveling for business. She provided details about hotel stays, romantic dinners, and text messages expressing love and commitment to another woman, while maintaining the facade of a faithful marriage at home. She described discovering evidence on credit card bills and in incompletely deleted messages, and she characterized James as a liar and betrayer who deserved to have his infidelity exposed to everyone who knew him. The studio fell into shocked silence. The competing family looked horrified and uncomfortable, clearly not having anticipated witnessing such a public and brutal exposure of infidelity. Michael and Rebecca appeared distressed, caught between loyalty to Sarah and recognition that what she was doing crossed lines of dignity and appropriateness. Patricia, James's sister, looked stunned and angry, clearly learning about her brother's affair in this terrible public way, and James stood frozen, his face cycling through shock, humiliation, anger, and devastation as his private moral failure was broadcast to everyone present and would soon be viewed by millions of television viewers. Harvey stopped the game immediately. He set down his cards and stood silently for a long moment, clearly processing what had just occurred and considering how to respond to this unprecedented situation. The production crew did not know whether to continue filming or cut to commercial, but Steve's demeanor made clear that whatever happened next would be significant. He approached Sarah directly, his expression serious and his usual entertainment persona entirely absent. Steve asked Sarah a direct question. He asked whether she had planned this exposure, whether she had agreed to appear on Family Feud specifically to reveal her husband's infidelity on national television in front of millions of viewers. Sarah did not deny it. She confirmed that yes, she had planned this moment carefully, and that she believed James deserved to be exposed and humiliated publicly for what he had done to their marriage and their family. She said that private confrontation had been insufficient, that James had not shown genuine remorse or made real efforts to repair the damage, and that public shame was the only consequence severe enough to match the harm he had inflicted. Steve's response was not what Sarah expected. Instead of praising her courage for exposing an unfaithful husband or sympathizing with her pain as a betrayed wife, Steve questioned her judgment and her motives for choosing such a destructive method of addressing infidelity. His tone was serious but not unkind as he began what would become one of the most complex and nuanced interventions in Family Feud. Steve Harvey made a decision to address both the infidelity and the method of exposure, refusing to take sides in a simple betrayer versus betrayed narrative, and instead examining the complicated reality of how hurt people sometimes become harmful people in their pursuit of justice or revenge. Steve began by acknowledging James's infidelity directly. He said that cheating on your spouse after 19 years of marriage was a profound betrayal, that the affair James had conducted represented a violation of vows and trust that caused genuine and serious harm. He said that James's minimization of his wife's contributions and his characterization of their marriage as obligatory rather than valued added insult to the injury of physical betrayal. He made clear that he was not defending or excusing James's behavior and that infidelity was wrong regardless of circumstances or rationalizations. However, Steve then turned his attention to Sarah's choices and delivered commentary that shocked the audience and would generate significant controversy. He said that while Sarah's pain and anger were entirely understandable and justified given what James had done, the choice to use a national television platform to expose and humiliate her husband revealed something troubling about her own character and judgment. He pointed out that she had multiple options for how to address her husband's infidelity, including private confrontation, couples counseling, separation, divorce, or even private conversations with family and friends. Instead, she had chosen the most public and humiliating method possible, orchestrating an exposure designed to maximize James's shame and damage his reputation permanently. Steve asked Sarah what she hoped to accomplish through this public exposure. He asked whether she believed that humiliating James on national television would somehow repair their marriage or heal the pain of his betrayal. He questioned whether destroying James's public image and professional reputation through broadcast exposure served any legitimate purpose beyond satisfying her desire for revenge. He pointed out that their 3 teenage children would have to watch their mother publicly shame their father, would have to face classmates and friends who had seen the episode, and would carry the trauma of their parents' most painful conflict being displayed as entertainment for millions. Sarah's response was defensive. She argued that James deserved public shame for his actions, that infidelity should have consequences, and that she had every right to tell her truth about what he had done. She said that for too long society had protected unfaithful men by allowing their betrayals to remain private while wives were expected to suffer in silence. She characterized her exposure as speaking truth to power and refusing to protect James from the natural consequences of his choices. Steve challenged this framing directly. He said that there was a significant difference between refusing to remain silent about abuse or betrayal and orchestrating public humiliation designed specifically to damage someone's reputation and cause maximum suffering. He pointed out that Sarah had not simply told her truth in a straightforward way. She had planned a calculated public ambush, had pressured James to participate under false pretenses, and had used a game show platform as a weapon to deliver shame and embarrassment. He said that while James's infidelity was wrong, Sarah's method of addressing it was also wrong, and that 2 wrongs did not somehow create a right. Steve then addressed the issue of consequences and justice in more nuanced terms. He acknowledged that James absolutely should face consequences for his infidelity, and that those consequences might include the end of his marriage, loss of trust from his children, disappointment from family and friends, and the natural relational damage that comes from betraying people who trusted you. However, he emphasized that orchestrated public humiliation on national television went beyond natural consequences into the realm of revenge, and that revenge was ultimately destructive to everyone involved, including the person seeking it. He told Sarah that he understood she was in pain and that discovering her husband's affair after 19 years of marriage had been devastating. He acknowledged that her anger was valid and that James's minimal remorse and inadequate efforts to repair their marriage had compounded her hurt and frustration. However, he said that her pain did not justify her choice to weaponize a television platform to shame her husband in the most public way possible. He pointed out that this choice would have lasting consequences not just for James but for their children, for their extended family relationships, and for Sarah herself, who would have to live with the knowledge that when she was hurt she chose to respond by causing the maximum possible pain to someone she had once loved. Steve then did something unexpected. He turned to James and addressed him directly about his responsibility, not just for the affair, but for the deterioration of their marriage that had led to Sarah feeling that public humiliation was her only option for justice. He told James that while Sarah's method of exposure was problematic, her underlying feelings of hurt and anger were entirely his fault. He said that James's infidelity, his dismissiveness of Sarah's contributions to their family, his refusal to do serious work to repair their marriage after the affair was discovered, and his apparent belief that minimal apology and surface-level changes were sufficient response to 14 months of deception had created the conditions where Sarah felt desperate enough to seek this kind of public revenge. Steve challenged James about his minimization of Sarah's role in their family's success. He pointed out that Sarah had spent 19 years supporting James's career by managing their household and raising their children, essentially enabling James to build his professional success without domestic distractions. He said that characterizing her as unsupportive while complaining to an affair partner revealed profound disrespect for her contributions and suggested James had taken for granted everything Sarah had sacrificed to support their family. He told James that if he wanted any chance of salvaging his marriage or even just maintaining a functional co-parenting relationship, he would need to acknowledge the full scope of harm he had caused and make genuine efforts to repair that harm rather than expecting Sarah to simply get over it on his timeline. The studio audience was completely silent, absorbed in what was unfolding. This was not a simple story of a wronged wife and a cheating husband. This was a complex examination of how betrayal creates cycles of harm, how hurt people sometimes respond by becoming harmful themselves, and how both the original transgression and the response to that transgression reveal character and values. Steve made a final statement that would become the most quoted and debated moment from the entire episode. He said that both James and Sarah had made choices that damaged their marriage and their family in profound ways. James had chosen to betray his wife and deceive his family for over a year, prioritizing his own desires over his commitments and causing deep pain through his infidelity and disrespect. Sarah had chosen to respond to that betrayal by orchestrating public humiliation, using their family's pain as entertainment and prioritizing revenge over the well-being of their children, who would have to witness and live with the aftermath of this public exposure. He said that their marriage was likely over not just because of James's affair, but because both of them had shown themselves capable of profound cruelty toward each other, and that rebuilding trust and respect from such a foundation would be extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible. He announced that Family Feud would not be awarding prize money to either James or Sarah, but would instead be donating an amount equivalent to the potential winnings to organizations supporting families affected by infidelity and relationship breakdown. He said that neither of them deserved to profit from this spectacle they had created, and that the money would be better used supporting people trying to navigate betrayal and divorce in healthier ways than what had been displayed that day. The episode that aired 8 weeks later became the most controversial in Family Feud history and generated intense debate about infidelity, public shame, revenge, and the ethics of airing such deeply personal conflicts as entertainment. The producers wrestled extensively with whether to air the episode at all, ultimately deciding that the complex moral questions it raised and Steve Harvey's nuanced handling of the situation warranted broadcasting with extensive content warnings and resources for families dealing with infidelity. Public reaction was deeply divided across multiple dimensions. Some viewers supported Sarah's exposure of James's affair, viewing it as justified consequence for his betrayal and as an empowering act of a woman refusing to protect an unfaithful husband from public judgment. They appreciated that she had refused to suffer in silence and had used available platforms to ensure James faced real consequences for his deception. Many women who had experienced infidelity expressed solidarity with Sarah's anger and her desire to make her husband's betrayal public, rather than protecting his reputation while dealing with private pain. However, substantial portions of the audience were disturbed by Sarah's orchestrated public humiliation of James regardless of his infidelity. They viewed her calculated exposure as cruel and vindictive, noting that her method seemed designed specifically to cause maximum damage to James's reputation and livelihood rather than to achieve any legitimate resolution or healing. Many viewers expressed concern about the impact on the Mitchell children, who would have to process their parents' conflict playing out on national television and who might face bullying or judgment from peers who had watched the episode. These critics argued that Sarah's right to be angry about infidelity did not extend to using her children's well-being as collateral damage in her pursuit of public revenge. A significant contingent of viewers appreciated Steve Harvey's nuanced handling of the situation, his refusal to simply take sides, and his willingness to critique both James's infidelity and Sarah's method of exposure. Relationship therapists and ethicists praised his acknowledgement that people can be both victims and perpetrators, that being wronged does not provide unlimited license to wrong others in return, and that how we respond to betrayal reveals as much about our character as the original betrayal itself. They noted that Steve's intervention modeled a more complex moral framework than simple victim versus villain narratives typically allow. For James and Sarah themselves, the aftermath of the episode accelerated the end of their marriage in ways that were painful for everyone involved. The public nature of the exposure destroyed any remaining possibility of reconciliation or repair. James filed for divorce within weeks of the taping, citing not just the irreparable damage from Sarah's public humiliation, but also his recognition that their marriage had been fundamentally broken long before his affair, with resentments and disrespect on both sides that made healthy partnership impossible. The divorce proceedings were contentious and bitter, with both parties weaponizing the Family Feud episode in different ways. Sarah used James's publicly exposed infidelity to argue for favorable terms in asset division and custody arrangements. James used Sarah's orchestrated public humiliation to argue that she had demonstrated vindictive and harmful behavior that called her judgment into question regarding custody and parenting decisions. The family court judge who presided over their case had watched the episode and found both parties' behavior concerning, ultimately making custody and financial decisions based on what would serve the children's interests, rather than rewarding or punishing either parent's demonstrated poor judgment. The impact on the Mitchell children was significant and painful. Their teenage years, already complicated by normal developmental challenges, were marked by having to navigate the public knowledge of their father's affair and their mother's brutal public response. They faced questions and comments from classmates and friends who had seen or heard about the episode. They struggled with conflicting loyalties, angry at their father for his betrayal but also hurt and embarrassed by their mother's choice to expose family pain so publicly. All three children eventually entered therapy to process the trauma of their parents' conflict and to develop strategies for maintaining relationships with both parents despite their disappointment and hurt regarding how both had handled the situation. Steve Harvey addressed the episode and its aftermath multiple times over the following year, using it as an example of complex moral situations where there are no simple heroes and villains. He spoke about receiving letters from viewers on all sides of the debate, from those who supported Sarah's exposure to those who condemned it, from people who appreciated his nuanced response to those who criticized him for not more strongly defending the betrayed wife or more harshly condemning the unfaithful husband. Steve used the episode to facilitate broader conversations about infidelity, about how couples can address betrayal in ways that allow for potential healing or at minimum dignified separation, and about the dangers of revenge that often ends up hurting everyone involved, including children and extended family who become collateral damage in conflicts between spouses. He emphasized that his critique of Sarah's method was not a defense of James's infidelity, but rather an acknowledgement that two wrongs do not create a right, and that how we respond to being wronged reveals our own values and character independent of what was done to us. 1 year after the episode aired, both James and Sarah were attempting to rebuild their separate lives while co-parenting 3 teenagers who continued to process the public implosion of their parents' marriage. James had experienced professional consequences from the public exposure of his affair, losing some clients who valued family values in their business relationships and facing awkward interactions with colleagues who had learned intimate details about his personal life. He had also done some genuine reflection about his behavior, eventually entering therapy to examine why he had betrayed his wife, how he had minimized her contributions to their family, and how he might build healthier relationship patterns in the future. Sarah had also faced consequences that she had not fully anticipated when planning her public exposure. While some people supported her actions, many others in her social and family circles had been disturbed by her orchestrated humiliation of James and had questioned her judgment and values. She had lost friendships with people who felt she had gone too far in her pursuit of revenge. Her relationship with her children had been strained by their hurt and embarrassment about the public nature of the exposure. She had also struggled with her own complicated feelings, recognizing that while her anger about James's infidelity remained valid, the satisfaction she had anticipated from publicly shaming him had been hollow and temporary, replaced by awareness that she had damaged her own reputation and her children's well-being in pursuit of revenge that ultimately served no constructive purpose. Both James and Sarah eventually came to recognize, through therapy and painful reflection, that their marriage had been troubled long before James's affair. They had built a partnership on unequal foundations, with James taking Sarah's contributions for granted while Sarah had suppressed her own needs and resentments rather than addressing problems directly. James's affair had been wrong regardless of pre-existing marital problems, but it had also been a symptom of deeper dysfunction that both had contributed to over many years. Sarah's public exposure, while understandable given her pain and anger, had been a choice to prioritize revenge over healing and had caused harm to innocent parties, including their children. Both had to live with the consequences of their choices and with the knowledge that they had both failed to handle their marital crisis in ways that protected their children and preserved their own dignity. The broader cultural impact of the episode included important conversations about the ethics of public shaming, the role of social media and television in facilitating revenge, and the question of whether public exposure of private moral failures serves any legitimate purpose or simply satisfies destructive impulses for revenge. Ethicists debated whether infidelity justifies public humiliation or whether dignity and privacy should be protected even for people who have behaved badly. Relationship therapists discussed healthier methods for addressing betrayal that allow for accountability without descending into destructive revenge cycles. The episode also sparked discussions about the entertainment industry's responsibility regarding broadcasting deeply personal conflicts. Critics questioned whether Family Feud should have aired an episode featuring such calculated public humiliation, arguing that doing so normalized using entertainment platforms as weapons for interpersonal revenge and potentially encouraged other people to orchestrate similar exposures. Defenders of the decision to air the episode argued that Steve Harvey's nuanced handling of the situation provided valuable modeling of complex moral thinking and that pretending such conflicts do not exist serves no one. 3 years after the episode, the Mitchell family was still navigating the long-term consequences of how James and Sarah had handled their marital crisis. The children were now young adults, all in college or beginning careers, maintaining relationships with both parents but carrying scars from having witnessed such public conflict during formative teenage years. James had remarried, this time building a relationship on more honest communication and more equal partnership. Sarah remained single, having done significant therapeutic work to address not just her response to James's betrayal, but deeper patterns in how she handled conflict and disappointment. Both James and Sarah expressed regret about their choices during this period of their lives, though they framed those regrets differently. James's regret focused on his infidelity itself, and the pain it had caused his wife and children, recognizing that his betrayal had been fundamentally wrong regardless of any pre-existing marital problems. Sarah's regret centered on her method of addressing the infidelity, recognizing that while her anger had been valid, orchestrating public humiliation had been a choice that caused additional harm to her children and had diminished her own character rather than achieving any meaningful justice or healing. The story of James and Sarah Mitchell's appearance on Family Feud remained a case study in the complexity of betrayal and response, demonstrating that moral situations rarely involve simple heroes and villains, and that how we respond to being wronged is as important as the original wrong itself. It provided a cautionary tale about the temptation to weaponize public platforms for revenge, and about how satisfaction from revenge is typically hollow and temporary, while the consequences of destructive choices endure. If this story has resonated with you, if you have experienced betrayal, or have been tempted to respond to being wronged through public humiliation or revenge, please know that while your pain and anger may be valid, how you choose to respond will define your character independent of what was done to you. Infidelity causes real harm and deserves real consequences, but orchestrating public shame typically causes additional harm to innocent parties and rarely achieves the healing or justice we hope for. If this story has given you something to think about regarding how we handle betrayal and conflict, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. These stories matter because they remind us that even when we have been deeply wronged, we still have choices about how we respond, and those choices reveal who we are. James Mitchell's infidelity was wrong and caused genuine harm to his wife and family. His minimization of Sarah's contributions and his inadequate efforts to repair the damage after discovery compounded that harm. Sarah Mitchell's public exposure of his affair, while understandable given her pain, was a choice to prioritize revenge over the well-being of their children and the possibility of any dignified resolution. Both of them made choices they later regretted, and both had to live with consequences that extended far beyond their own relationship to affect their children and broader family networks. Steve Harvey's intervention in their situation was an attempt to bring moral complexity to a situation where viewers might have been tempted to see only a villain and a victim. His willingness to critique both the infidelity and the response to that infidelity, to hold both parties accountable for their choices regardless of who had been wronged first, modeled a more nuanced approach to moral judgment than simple taking of sides typically allows. Whether viewers agreed with his approach or not, the episode forced important conversations about betrayal, revenge, public shaming, and the question of how we can seek justice or accountability without descending into destructive cycles where everyone ends up damaged. The legacy of that Family Feud episode is ultimately a reminder that betrayal in marriage is devastating and that infidelity causes real and lasting harm that deserves to be acknowledged and addressed. However, it also reminds us that public humiliation and revenge rarely achieve the healing or justice we seek, and often cause additional harm to innocent parties. The choices we make when we have been wronged reveal our character, just as clearly as the original transgression reveals the character of the person who wronged us. Both James and Sarah made choices that damaged their family and diminished their own dignity. Learning from their story means recognizing that we always have agency regarding how we respond to betrayal, and that some responses, however justified they might feel in moments of pain and anger, ultimately serve destruction rather than healing or justice.